advantages of water wicking. This water wicking topic was covered in the last video of the module. So it was given as a leading example, innovation towards urban gardening and agriculture. So what were the options for it? First one, increased water efficiency. Second, no root competition from external plants. Third one, limited leaching. And fourth option was all of the above. 85% of you have answered correctly saying all of the above. The last question was, what is the function of high-level predators, which is a type of soil organism like mutualist? First option, improved soil structure by borrowing and passing soil through their guts. Second option, fixation of nitrogen. Third is shed plant litter as they feed on bacteria and fungus. Fourth one is stimulate activity of bacterial population. 54% of you answered correctly, saying improve soil structure by borrowing and passing soil through their guts. 32nd leading option was shed plant litter as they feed on bacteria and fungus. Actually, this is a function of shedders. I think it's the type of organism called shedders are doing this function. Thank you for attempting the poll. Over to you, Dharmendra sir.
Yeah, thank you so much, Diksha. Yeah, I think we have Walter joining with us. Yeah, good morning, Walter.
Good morning, good afternoon here, and welcome. Okay, have you got my video? Can you see me on my screen? I can see you.
We can't see you yet. We can't see you yet.
Okay, well, let me look at what. No, you should be able to.
You are co-host now. You should be sharing.
Yeah, I should. I can see my position, but I just can't see.
Yes, we can see you now. And your microphone is muted.
Yes. Is it better now? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. Right. Okay. Excellent. It's always simple, but basically just to get it all right. But here we are. Thank you very much, all the way from Australia. And how's India?
Yes.
1.4 billion people. I hope everyone's well.
Yes. We have Anne-Sophie also, who has joined with us now.
Oh, wonderful.
Welcome, Anne-Sophie.
Hello, Anne-Sophie.
Hi.
Okay. Greetings.
Hi, greetings. I've been quietly listening in.
No, please. You're the important person. Very important person. Well, look, let's get started, because obviously this is now module 6 in this 10 series masterclass looking at natural farming in India, agroecology. But more importantly than India, well, that is a key testing ground demonstration. This is really relevant agroecology all over the world. How are we going to feed the 10 billion people by 2050? How are we going to secure our sustainable biosystems, rehydrate our landscapes, and through that also maintain a stable, safe climate? But look, today, module 6, we're really focused very much on biofertility. What is the actual basis of biofertility, and how does natural farming give us biofertility? How can we use it? Just in terms of context, this is number 6, module 6. The first 4 modules went through why natural farming is important, what were the key targets, the objectives that we had to achieve through it. The third one really looked at how nature operated and created the biosystems through regenerating the earth's soil carbon sponge, and in a sense, how we can and must duplicate those natural processes. The fourth module was all about the sponge, the actual physical properties, and how the sponge enabled hydrology, nutrient availability, rootability, resilience, and productivity to be established. But then, exciting, last week we got onto some of the actual practical tools or opportunities that the sponge creates. Because basically, last week we talked about rehydrating landscapes through regenerating the Earth's soil carbon sponge. And we went through all the details of how hydrology can be maintained, how we can capture every raindrop, and of course, use it effectively to grow plants. But today is the second one of those 3 functional workshops, is looking at the actual biofertility and really how the sponge enables biofertility and sustained productivity. And of course, the next one that you'll get the information on will be looking at health, looking at the preventative health of people, because after all, that's life or death, isn't it? So we want to be healthy. We need to be healthy. We need to have healthy soils to sustain healthy people. Okay, so the whole issue of biofertility is really a critical, essential element. It's very simple that physically, obviously, there's abundant sunshine. There's more than enough CO2 in the atmosphere. 78% of the atmosphere is nitrogen. And of course, there's plenty of water. 5% of the air is actually made of water, or up to 5%. So we've got all these raw materials, but the thing that is limiting are essential nutrients. Okay, for life to occur, for biochemistry and functions to occur, we need some 50 essential mineral nutrients. And of course, these must come and can only come from our soil directly or via our soils in the case of nitrogen fixation. And of course, so that's the first thing. Soils are really the source of all those mineral nutrients. And of course, without soil, we don't have life. The other thing, of course, then we ask the question, right, if they're so critical, how do we get access to them? How do we make them available? And that availability is going to be a key issue. And of course, that is through microbes and plants. Okay, it's the microbes that are actually using and making those nutrients available, providing them to plants. And of course, then it's the plants with those nutrients and water and CO2 that can actually make the carbon that drives the whole biosystem. So basically, mineral nutrients in the soil are critical, as are microbes to make them available. And in fact, basically all the nutrition of natural systems and all the nutrition of natural farming, therefore, is driven by these microbial ecologies. The fixation of nutrients, the solubilization of nutrients, their access, their availability, and their cycling, those 5 key fundamental functions are all governed by microbes. And so obviously without the microbes, we lose those functions and effectively lose biofertility. As we saw in module number 4, when we were talking about the sponge, remember we were looking at this little pieces of toys for my granddaughter, and these are little chips, different colors. There's 10 chips here. If they're all fused together in a rock, in a solid compacted soil, if you can see there's 2 red chips or red bands, you can see there's very little nutrient that's available. And of course, it's by the microbes in the soil creating the soil carbon sponge that allows those 10 little chips to form an open, loose lattice structure. And now if we look at the 2 red discs, you can see the surface area, the availability of nutrients from those red discs is increased exponentially. And so that's all that nature has done, is she has just simply created the sponge, taken the same minerals, but now arranged them in a sponge, vastly increasing the availability of those nutrients. And of course, that's what's governed all natural biosystems on this planet for the last 420 million years. That's what's governed biofertility. And in a sense, that's what natural farming is using as well. How do we optimize the actual soil carbon sponge formation to create these open loose matrices that make nutrients available. And of course, it's here we get the fixation, the solubilization, the access, uptake, and cycling. And of course, that's from, again, the fungi and then the roots of the plants with their symbiotic fungi functioning together. And it's actually that gives you the biofertility of natural systems. Rainforests occur on some of the world's poorest soils, some of the soils with the lowest nutrient fertility, but they can sustain and survive, not because those soils have lots of nutrients in them. They sustain and survive because they are so efficient at uptake and cycling that one molecule of phosphorus is moved perhaps 1,000 times faster than in a chemical agricultural situation. So you can see with 1,000th of the nutrient content, you can have equivalent productivity because you're making those nutrients available over and over again through cycling. And so the secret of natural farming, secret with natural biosystems are the functional health of those 5 processes: fixation, solubilization, access, uptake, and cycling. And that's, in a sense, what we totally depend on for our future. How do we restore the health of our soil, the physical structure of our soils, the microbial ecology of the soils that can make those nutrients available? Paradoxically, and in a very tragic way, in a sense, the last 70 years, we've gone on a completely different tangent in industrial agriculture. Because we were able to harness lots of oil-based energy and basically use that oil-based energy for cultivation, for making fertilizers, making biocides, etc., we've basically switched to an industrial agriculture, part of the Green Revolution story, where basically we're saying, no, we don't need to rely on these microbes as much. We ignored them largely. And instead, we were relying on saying, yeah, if we've got a nutrient deficient soil, we can just simply add more nutrients from outside. We can mine, process, and add nutrients. And we got into a mentality of actually an extractive mining concept where we either mine the nutrients in that soil or we mine nutrients from deposits elsewhere, add them to the soil, and we're always having to add nutrients in a linear extractive process, completely contrasting what nature did, which worked in a closed cyclic processes. And in a sense, our agriculture in the last 70 years, industrial agriculture has largely been based on that concept of adding nutrients, right? We need to add fertilizer for productivity. And of course, that's enormously expensive. And of course, if we haven't got the cash, the income to do that, we end up with ever poorer crops, not just because we haven't got the nutrients, but by having added the nutrients and cultivated and all these industrial agricultural practices, we've also effectively destroyed the microorganisms that made those nutrients more available naturally. So we both depleted the nutrients, but also we've destroyed the processes that make them available. Our Green Revolution agriculture, therefore, was totally invested on more on additions, ever adding more on to try and maintain plant productivity and, of course, feed the planet on it. It's totally unsustainable for a whole sequence of reasons. For example, industrial food, we're investing 10 units of oil-based energy for effectively producing 1 unit of food energy because of our proliferate cultivation and use of energy in agriculture. So we're getting a 1 to 10 or 10% efficiency, 1 in 10, rather than nature, which is always continually making nutrients available. But by having to add nutrients in industrial agriculture, we're also fundamentally changing the imbalance of nutrients. Nature requires some 50 essential elements in the right ratio, forms, balances, and it's the ratios that are so critical. So one nutrient in excess of its balancing partner can cause a lot of toxic effects and loss of fertility. So it's this destabilization of balances that can be very dangerous. By also adding excessive nutrients, for example, nitrate, we can also change the whole hormonal physiology of the plants. So we can get very, very much faster growing shoots at the expense of roots. And of course, those plants will become much, much more stress vulnerable and nutrient dependent. Adding excess chemical nutrients as fertilizers, of course, often causes major problems, for example, in the acidification of soils. We're adding soluble salts that's acidifying the soils. You know, the sulfates turn to sulfuric acid, the nitrates turn to nitric acids. So we're acidifying the soils, and with that, we're actually, again, making nutrients less available, but often making toxic elements in the soil, cadmium, lead, mercury, for example, come into solution, so they become toxic. As you had in your quiz, basically in the chemical agriculture, the green agriculture, we're also losing vast quantities of the added fertilizer nutrients. Up to 90% is lost through either leaching, which then pollutes our waterways and eutrophies our dams and lakes, through volatilization in the case of nitrogen, which then just turns back into the atmosphere, or through the actual occlusion. Okay, nature has iron, aluminium oxides in its soils, very big, they're the dominant elements actually on the earth, and these iron, aluminium oxide very, very rapidly lock up and make unavailable added fertilizer nutrients. Over 90% of the phosphorus, for example, we've added in agriculture over the last 70 years are now locked up. They're still in the soils, but they're locked up, unavailable, and not able to be productive. The addition of excessive nutrients can also actually kill or destroy the carbon fixation. For example, excess nitrogen in the soil, excess nitrate will oxidize some 30 grams of carbon for every gram of excess nitrate available. So it becomes actually an accelerated soil structural degradation medium. It actually destroys the soil structure, takes it back from the sponge back to a solid rock. And of course, with that, you don't have the productivity, etc. But most seriously, adding excess fertilizer nutrients actually will kill the microbes, particularly those critical microbes that are essential in driving the nutritional integrity of those soils and the functional health of those soils. So basically, look, that was the key message of Module 6. So the issue is, how do we get back to restoring the natural microbial biofertility, the natural functionality and biofertility, and how do we restore those processes of fixation, solubilization, access, uptake, and cycling? And of course, that's a bit like going to a doctor. We have to look at our soils. We have to see what's limiting functionally, and then how do we actually turn back to nature and use things like biostimulants. And that's, of course, where natural farming and traditional practices, whether it's cow dung, cow urine, organic matter, a whole series of practices are actually operating as biostimulants, creating the conditions and switching on the activity of these essential nutrients in soil. And a lot of conventional scientists misunderstand it completely. They're saying, hey, you're not adding enough nutrients in quantity to give the fertility response. Well, of course you're not. You're not adding these nutrients. You are stimulating the activity of the fungi that make those nutrients available from the soil. So it's not an adding concept. It's a matter of switching on functional activities. So when we have animals or cow dung or urines integrated into that soil, they're working by switching on these microbial processes, and you don't need the same nutrients, nitrates, for example, in the cow dung that we're adding as artificial nitrogen. All you need to do is switch on natural nitrogen fixation bacteria, actinomycetes from the air, and it will continue doing that. So the whole secret of natural farming, enhancing, restoring the biofertility, is rebuilding these natural microbial ecologies. Unfortunately, there's not one single magic bullet or magic jungle juice that people can sell you, thank goodness. It's a matter of saying, how do we rebuild those natural cycles, the systems of mixed cover crops, good soil management, integrating animals back into agriculture, and then helping that whole thing process. So look, that's basically the content of the module 6. But as always, we've had 20 minutes outlining of what that is. But now let's go and ask your questions or respond to your question. And again, I'm really impressed and congratulate you. Some very good questions came up. Diksha sort of sent me some of those already, but there may be others as well. So let's go through each of those questions and let me outline how I understand the functions in each of them operate and how they can be used in natural farming to your benefit. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Walter, for the detailed summary of Module 6. So we can start the Q&A session. The first question is, with respect to experiments on field, how do bacteria and fungi influence nutrient bioavailability in degraded soil? We know compacted soil are made spongy. What about degraded conditions like saline or sandy soil? What role does nutrient efficiency play in plants' optimal and stress conditions?
Right. Okay. Look, this is, again, very good question, and it's getting to the heart to see how do bacteria and fungi influence nutrient availability. And it's, again, all very, very simply by creating, as we say, the sponge. And see, that's why we always come back to Module 4, the criticality of the sponge. We, first of all, create the surface area whereby fungi and nutrients can now operate functionally on these surfaces, right? So we've created the right microenvironment through putting carbon in the soil, through having the aeration, the voids, the hydration of the soil, so those living systems can function optimally. Similarly, the roots of the plants can function optimally, pumping exudates to feed the fungi, to feed the bacteria for their activity. So it is this system of basically the sponge creating the surface three-dimensional matrix, the surface exposure for nutrient uptake and functionality. And it's that creates then the bioavailability of those nutrients. It's that creates the capacity for the microbes to efficiently take them up and move them to the plants to feed the plants. And it's, of course, that allows the microbes at the same time to break down dead organic matter and recycle nutrients for ever resupplying the nutrition of that crop or that biosystem. And, you know, if it can do it 1,000 times faster because we've created the right habitat, then we only need to have 1,000th of the actual nutrients quantitatively in that soil, provided we constantly recycle that nutrient, which of course is what is happening in natural farming. So basically, the bacteria, the fungi, operate through creating the sponge in the first place, putting the carbon in the soil through processes we talked in Module 4, you know, the carbon sequestration. But that in its turn creates the conditions for having the hydration of the soil, so the water availability is there, but also the surface area exposure. And basically, it allows then plants to function very efficiently, particularly under stress conditions, right? Because you can imagine when water now becomes limiting, then a matrix like this with lots of voids, lots of water within the soil matrix can hold a lot more water than if it was in a locked in, basically compacted soil. And so it's these functionalities that become really important in stress conditions, whether it's water limiting or other limiting stress factors. The same with nutrients. The poorer the soil is, the more nutrient limited, deficient it is, the more critical these microbes are at making that nutrient more important or making that nutrient available. So as we get into poorer marginal land systems, nature has evolved these microbes to be ultra efficient. And of course, in Australia, which is one of the oldest inhabited landscapes, vegetated landscapes, it's been basically stable for 46 million years, very old, very leach soils. These microbes have evolved to a very, very high level, and thereby giving us highly efficient symbiotic nutrient fixation, nutrient solubilization, nutrient access and uptake systems. And they're, of course, the things that we can use in natural farming to rebuild biofertility. Okay, next question, but we'll come on to that bit more. I'm sure in the others. Yes, next question.
How are the microbial population in root biomass and exudates quantified? And how are these measurements related to plant diversity? Am I audible?
You are, but I think Walter is not there. Walter is out of the meeting.
Walter is in the waiting room. I have promoting him to panelist right now. Walter, can you hear me? You're on mute.
I'm unmuting and I'm trying to bring the video up again. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
But you can't see me.
No, we can't for now.
Hang on, let me try again. Video. Okay. Oh, hang on. You cannot start your video because the host has disabled it. Okay, can you undisable my video?
You can try
Hello?
now, Walter. We have
Okay.
made you the co-host.
Yeah, yes, right, we are back. Can you see me, hear me?
Yes, we can see you and we can hear you.
My apologies. I don't know what happened. It just dropped out, but here we are back again. So please, let's persevere, and we can take a few extra minutes, to make sure we catch up. So the question was, that was the first answer. So what's the next question, please?
How can the microbial population in root biomass and exudates be quantified? And how are these measurements related to plant diversity?
Right. Look, thank you again. This is a very important question, and it's something that's really quite tricky. For a long time, we were, of course, able to isolate particular organisms from soils through microbiology by giving the right food and then growing them in different conditions. But we knew that we were only ever able to see about 1-2% of the natural population. 99% of the organisms in soil, in a sense, were invisible to us. We didn't know they were there. But more recently, we've been making major advances in DNA analysis, where now there's a lot of work going on to say, look, let's look at all the DNA in soil, and then we're more or less saying all this DNA must come from soil microbes, and that's valid. So we get this enormous quantity confirming that, 99% of nutrient, or 99% of microbes were in that soil, but we couldn't see them. But what we end up with instead is this very, very complicated, rich alphabet soup of nucleotides. And of course, it tells us nothing about what the nutrients are, what are they doing. It just says there's massive nature's got massive quantities of nutrients operating in that soil. In fact, there's more nutrient biomass weight-wise under the soil than there is in terms of plants and animals living above the soil, right? So if you're looking the weight of living biomass in a soil, there's more underground down under than there is above. So this has been a real problem in terms of trying to mathematically quantify, nutrient microbial ecologies and nutrient things. But in a way, we don't need to do that. And in our research in the past, when I was working in CSIRO and what have you, we bypassed all of that, because what we really want to do is understand the functional processes, understand what is the actual functional rates of what's going on. And for that, we don't need to isolate the organisms. We don't need to quantify them. All we need to do is have very simple natural bioassays of their activity. And that's as simple as looking at how effectively and fast they, for example, utilize different substrate. So if we put a gram of anything in a soil, just say sugar, then we can tell from the rate at which that gram of sugar is used, we can get a measure of the rate of sugar breakdown capacity in that soil. And so it is with every function in that soil. So we can measure the functional efficiency activity of soils through these bioassays, where we simply add baits or add substrates and then measure the rate at which that substrate was used. So if you're looking at, again, phosphorus solubilization, you add a microgram of phosphorus and you look at how fast was it solubilized, and that gives you a very good measure of the phosphorus solubilization functional activity of that soil. And of course, then you could compare different soils on their functional activity ratings. Okay, so you could say, what have we done to our soils that has either enhanced or retarded that phosphorus solubilization activity? And that has really important, significant meaning. Okay, so we can understand soil microbial activity very, very well at a functional level through these bioassays. And the same goes with mycorrhiza. We can assess the microbial activity, the mycorrhizal activity of those soils by seeing, yes, how effectively can they colonize the roots of seedlings. So we have bait seedlings. We look at how effectively they're infected. And also, of course, we can look at the growth of those seedlings to see how well they can establish mycorrhizal symbioses in that soil. So basically, that's, in a sense, a key, powerful tool to understanding the natural microbial functionality of soils. But it's also a powerful tool where we can say, look, how do we stimulate these activities? For example, what are the value of different biostimulants and enhancing, whether it's phosphorus solubilization or mycorrhizal infectivity? See, then we can say, well, look, comparing soil A with soil B or treatment A with treatment B, how good are they, or how detrimental are they at changing the activity of those microbes? And through that, we were able to establish a very sophisticated understanding of soil microbial activities, soil microbial ecology, and the effect of our land management practices on those processes. And of course, we can do that simply in the field, where we basically say, look, let's just take a sample of soil, we assess its relative activity compared to a control or compared to a treatment, and basically it's always relative to the control, but it gives us a very good rating of the actual health and activity of that microbe in that soil. So I hope that answers the question. It's actually, it's answering a different question, but yeah, you can go and spend forever trying to quantify numerically the numbers. You can spend forever trying to identify what the whole diversity of organisms in that soil are. It'll get you nowhere. Basically, you know, just, well, spend a lot of years research with basically nothing to show for it. But conversely, by reading the activity of these processes in soil, we can get a very, very sophisticated, deep understanding of what drives and what enhances and what retards healthy soil microbial ecologies. So I hope that sort of gives you some idea about that, but we can go further into what some of these bioassays are. You have to design specific ones depending on the question that you're asking. If you want to look at, for example, nitrogen fixation rates, right, then you can put specific bioassays in to look at, okay, how much a triple bonded nitrogen molecule, how quickly can that triple bonded molecule be broken down? And for example, there we've used a mimic molecule acetylene, and we look at acetylene reduction and saying, look, here is the rate at which nature can break down acetylene, and that's in a sense an indicator of nitrogen fixation capacity of that soil. So there's always clever ways of doing that, but we have to ask the question, what is it, what you're trying to assess? Therefore, what's the best bioassay? And then set up a very simple, practical, controlled experimentation to measure that. Okay, next question.
How can we demonstrate through simple on-field experiment to a farmer the condition of his soil?
Okay, so this is, again, thank you, again, very important, very profound. So you've got a farmer, you're standing on the soil, they've been using the soil, and of course, how do you say to that farmer, your soil is more productive, more healthy, more fertile than the soil next door or than it was 12 months ago? So how do you assess that? And again, some of it, depending what you want, you can actually, as I said, use these bioassays, right? If you wanted to know, and this is what my work in CSIRO in the 1970s, 80s was all about, looking at the mycorrhizal activity across tropical agriculture, tropical savanna agriculture in Australia. I could look at relative infectivity of microbes, mycorrhiza in those soils. Are they present? How active are they? And what's limiting them through a bioassay technique that we developed. But of course, from a general farmer point of view, there's also very other simple bioindicators. For example, we talked yesterday, last module, in infiltration terms. So simply by doing an infiltration test, we can get a picture of how much a three-dimensional open porous lattice is in that soil, and will water be able to infiltrate into that soil. So basically just taking a liter of water, pouring it onto a defined column of soil, in a ring, and then looking how fast the water infiltrates, gives you a very good bioassay of soil structure and in terms of its hydrological function. We can also, of course, look at nutrition in the same way. We can say, okay, well, look, are the plants growing in that area of soil more nutrient rich, growing better? And if they are, how does that rate to nutrient uptake? So if they're able to get more nutrients, we're using the plant more or less as a bioassay of that nutrition. We can also measure, for example, like root growth, like we can sort of take a spade, we can examine that soil, we can look at the proliferation of roots down the 10 centimeters, or they proliferating to 30, 40, 50 centimeter. And that's sort of, again, a fantastic bioindicator. And not just, of course, roots. With that comes all the microbial, the worms, the mesofauna, that whole life in the soil. At the end of the day, though, the point is the farmer can see that themselves from a point of the productivity and resilience of their land. So it's perhaps rather the case of saying, your crops are now much, much poorer. Here are the soil limitations that are contributing to driving that. So use the crop as actually the bioassay, and then explain the lack of crop performance or the improved crop performance on the basis of these soil characteristics. So focus on the crop. Vijay, for example, demonstrated very nicely with basic natural farming in Andhra Pradesh, for example, to a great surprise, the perenniality of plants increased. So whereas in a traditional agricultural system, for example, cotton, you have to plant it every year. Under natural farming, because the root system was so much healthier, the plant had so much more vigor, basically the cotton plant was able to regenerate and reshoot for several seasons. Okay, so that perenniality was again a bioassay of the improved root and soil and microbial health in the soil. So look at the plants and then go from the plants to say what soil conditions are limiting and what we can do to change it, and then expect the growth response. So from a farmer point of view, the simple practical field experiment is really in his crop and explaining why that crop is performing exceptionally well or not so well. Okay, number 4.
Walter, just 1 minute. So from the earlier questions, I think a little more elaboration can you make regarding, for example, you taught us that compact soils are the bug density is reduced and volume increases and surface area increase, all of that, and water retention, all of that. How about degraded soils in terms of sandy soils where there is no structure, water retention is not there, and they are all sand particles, surface area is also very less. In that context, how biofertility or soil sponge situations can be arrived at? That is one question.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, it cuts both ways. Absolutely. If we've got a sand, like a simple beach sand or a sand dune, then sure, we've got the same mineral structure. It's still often a loose structure, but now basically it can't retain the water. It can infiltrate the water, but the water can't be retained. It just drains through that soil. And so obviously the organic matter, the microbes, the carbon that's fixed is then helping to retain, to keep water in that soil. And the same applies with nutrients, right? Nutrients are either absorbed onto these mineral surfaces, or if they're soluble, they will be leached and lost from that soil. But by increasing the organic matter content of that sandy soil, then the organic matter has enormous numbers of negative charges across its surface areas, and it can actually attract and hold and retain cation nutrients, okay? So you increase the cation exchange capacity, you increase the actual nutrient holding capacity of the soil. Think of it like Velcro, the amount of hooks that you can stick and retain nutrients on can increase enormously as its organic matter increases. So you're right, we started off with a rock, and there was a compacted soil without oxygen, without surface area exposure, but we can have the opposite where we have too much surface area exposure, and there we need the organic matter and the microbes to hold more water, to retain more nutrients, to make them more available. So there's that sweet spot of, 3 to 5% organic matter to make that soil optimally hold water and hold nutrients.
Thank you. And a follow-up question regarding degraded soils. We have situations like both acidic and saline soils. So microbes can bring those soil conditions to near neutral situations also?
Yeah, look, basically this comes back to this simple diagram, like where we have a compacted soil, a rock, its bulk density is about 2.6 grams per cc or above, whereas a good, healthy organic soil has a bulk density of about 1.2 grams per cc. So you can understand from that over 50% of the space in a healthy soil is made up of voids, of nothing, okay, from that bulk density. Where we degrade a soil and we progressively get to bulk densities of 1.6, 1.8, then we very quickly get to a position where roots can't penetrate, water can't be held in anywhere near the same quantity, and so the structure and the productivity of that soil declines rapidly. So, like from having a healthy soil at 1.2 grams per C bulk density, once we get above much 1.6, 1.7, we are losing rootability, we're losing void capacity, water retention, nutrient availability in a very serious way. So, so in a sense, bulk density can be used, but it doesn't have to be accurately measured. You can do that just from understanding, putting a spade in the soil or penetrometer in the soil, how hard it is for that soil to be penetrated to depth. It's another important thing. Always think of that soil as far as the depth, because at the moment, if you're only using 10, 20 centimeters of friable soil, below that everything is compacted, then your whole biosystem, your whole vegetation is dependent on that 10 centimeters. Whereas otherwise, in a healthy situation, you could have 1 meter or 2 meters of rooted soil. And so the volume of soil resources that you've got access to is exponentially greater, right? So it's not just the bulk density, but then look at the volume of soil resource that you can use for bio or for life function.
Thank you, Walter. What about acidic soils and saline soils?
Okay. Now, right, thank you very much. Again, very good point. And it comes back to what we were saying before. If we've got basically an acidic soil, we have basically got an excess of hydrogen ion charges, basically positive charges in that soil, and that creates the acidity. It's an exponential curve, but obviously a soil of pH 3 has 10 times the amount of positive hydrogen charged particles in the soil solution compared to a soil of pH 4. Okay, and so what we want to do then, we want to reduce the amount of hydrogen ions in that soil. And the way that nature does that, it's very, very simple. All that nature does is increase the organic matter content, the sponge, and that organic matter content has vast numbers of negative charges on its surface. Okay, the ratio of 30,000 to 1 compared with mineral sand particles, for example, right? So it can add massive amounts of negative charges by adding organic matter. These negative charges, of course, then adsorb onto them the hydrogen ions that were in the soil solution. Okay? Negative charge attracts a positive hydrogen charge. That hydrogen ion is no longer in the soil solution. So by definition, the pH of that soil goes up, the acidity declines. Okay, there's still the same amount of hydrogen ions in the whole soil matrix, but they're no longer available in the solution. Therefore, the acidity is neutralized. Okay, and so nature naturally neutralizes acid soils back to pH 5.86 by simply absorbing hydrogen ions onto these organic matter negative charge surfaces. It doesn't have to add lime, it just does it naturally by increasing organic matter. Now, exactly the same thing happens with sodic soils, right? In sodic soils, you've got excess sodium ions in that soil solution. That's sodium plus, like hydrogen ion, it's a positively charged ion. And of course, it's excessive and it becomes toxic. But again, if you increase the organic matter content of that sodic soil, then you will increase the negative charges available, which will absorb the sodium ions onto them, taking those sodium ions out of the soil solution, locking them up on the soil, and your sodicity or your sodium levels drops, and the whole physical structure of the soil improves. And so that's what happens, for example, in marine marshes. Okay, if you go to marine marshes, massive amounts of organic matter is produced by the marine plants. They're producing massive quantities of negative charges that take the sodium out from soil solution and progressively neutralize the salt, the sodicity of that soil. So do you understand? Nature, in a very elegant, sophisticated, simple way, neutralizes acid soils, neutralizes sodic soils, and returns them all to higher biofertility, a healthier, well-structured, nutrient-rich state.
Yeah. How about alkaline soils where carbonates and bicarbonates are there that are negatively charged?
Okay, so you're now looking at soils with high carbonate levels, right?
Correct. Alkaline.
Yeah, alkaline. Look, the same processes works, obviously in that case, not through organic matter charges, but basically I think the carbonates, when they break down to bicarbonates and calcium, right? So you end up with calcium ions and bicarbonate ions, you get the same breaking down of the carbonates into more stable nutrient thing. It's a little bit more complex, the chemistry, but it's the same neutralizing buffering process. So basically, as a rule, organic matter, all soils naturally are neutralized, buffered through that organic matter addition through the plants, the microbes adding it. And in fact, that's all that nature had to work with, right? She just had basically the capacity of putting sunlight, CO2 into those soils to create healthy soils. And of course, we can do the same thing in natural farming. But we don't need lime, and we don't need, desalination plants. We just neutralize. And the same thing applies with toxic heavy metals, right? I mean, soils can have very high levels of cadmium or lead, and particularly when they're acid. And the way to get rid of that is, of course, to, again, neutralize the acidity in the soil, and then the lead and the cadmium can't stay in soil solution. They get bound up again on mineral particles. And when they get bound up, they're no longer active, so they're no longer toxic. There's still the same nutrients in the soil, but they're now locked up, unavailable, and benign.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
No, pleasure. But it's fascinating, isn't it? Just how simple the solution nature uses, and it's so simple for us in natural farming to do the same.
Good.
Okay, I noticed here that you had a question that you sent on about urban farming, right? And I think I'd like to really come, because we're going to come on to this a little bit more next week when we're talking about preventative nutrient integrity, preventative health. But it's actually a critically important situation, because it's basically redesigning agriculture now to build these nutrient cycles, right? We're effectively harvesting nutrients from soils as we take our food from them. And we, of course, export those nutrients to cities or wherever that food is eaten. And those nutrients, of course, then in our effluent, in our waste. And it's critically important that we basically look at how do we recycle those nutrients from our waste back into the soil they came from or other soils. So we build this total nutrient cycle. The whole survival of Asian populations for thousands of years was based on this very natural, sophisticated cycling of nutrients and animal and human waste. Okay? And no civilization has survived without bringing this organic cycle in. They basically last for 300-400 years, but then they've mined their soils and basically they collapse unless they invade somebody else's land. And so building these nutrient cycles is critically important. It's critically important for India, in fact, because with 1.4 billion people, you've got this very powerful need to build healthy nutrient cycles to sustain food production forever to support that population. You've got an enormous advantage in doing that because 60% of Indians still live in the land, the countryside, in villages. So these rural villages become actually optimum design structure, village, urban village, cyclic economies whereby you have basically growing crops nearby, growing food, feeding people in the villages, and those nutrients then recycled back in safe ways back onto the land to rebuild those nutrient cycles. So this is a really important strategic and political advantage that India has got because it still has a very healthy village economy and village society structure. And yes, it can be rebuilt, but it's basically a foundation for sustainability. It's much, much more dangerous where you have communities where all the young people are taken from the land, put into cities, used to make economic goods, manufactured goods, for example, but are then dependent on imported foods and often wasting those essential nutrients from their waste. So the capacity to rebuild nutrient cycle is going to be critical in the 21st century, in the next 20 years, if we're going to survive. And of course, urban agriculture happening all over the planet is a beautiful, elegant way of creating these closed cycles, growing healthier food, but also on another very profound level, making food available equitably on a needs basis so that we don't end up with this obscenity of so many people hungry, so many other people obese or overfed, and so many people, in a sense, subclinically malnourished, as we have in the West at the moment. We'll come into that a little bit next module, where we're talking about nutritional integrity, preventative health, but certainly urban agriculture, village agriculture, and what you're doing in India, demonstrating the veracity and the potential of natural farming at that village level, is globally a really important leading demonstration for future sustainability. There was one other question that was raised in the thing that I think is very important to sort of come back to, because it epitomizes actually what we've been talking about. The point is often made that, for example, in Europe, in organic agriculture, you need about 10 tons of farmyard manure per acre per annum to maintain that biosystem, right? And of course, they're right that in cold countries where there's a winter and they're storing the animals in sheds over the winter, then they have a lot of farmyard manure from that. And of course, they're returning, yes, about that quantity to have optimal organic agriculture. But again, it's a very Western sort of concept, because they're still saying, okay, we're producing this organic matter in our farms, and then we have to physically, energy intensively return it back to the land. But we don't need 10 tons. Well, hang on, let's say we don't actually need to put 10 tons back again. All we need to do is put the processes back again that generate the 10 tons. And that's a critically important thing. And it comes to our discussion with the functional biofertility of soils. It's not what we add, it's the availability, it's the functional health of the microbes driving it. Because if we can get healthy fungal microbial biostimulation happening, they will produce 10 tons of biomass from roots and root exudates and 10 tons of recycled nutrients per hectare naturally in their root zone without us having to transport it on. Okay, so it's not that we don't need to have this recycling, but we don't need to actually physically move that much organic matter from farmyard manure. We can do that in situ by multi-species cover cropping, bringing animals back into the cover crop stubbles to eat and biodigest and excrete the waste, and really building an active organic cycle in situ on that land. And this is, again, a critically powerful and important point for India, because it's your work and Vijay's work in India with pre-monsoon dry seeding that gives us a potential now for regreening vast areas of arid wasteland, degraded arid wasteland. And of course, we can't afford, if we're doing 1 million hectares of arid wasteland in this regeneration, we haven't got 10 tons of farmyard manure to put on a hectare, have we? But what we can do, we can re-stimulate those microbial ecologies, those biofertility processes and functions we've talked about, by re-stimulating them in situ. That pre-monsoon dry seeding can add the 3-4 tons of carbon per hectare per annum back into the soil. It can create the nutrient cycle as nature does in rainforests, and therefore it can rebuild the biofertility of those soils. So again, it's not the addition of organic matter, it's not the addition of fertilizers, but it's restarting, re-stimulating the activity of these natural 5 basic processes of biofertility: the fixation, solubilization, access, uptake, and cycling of nutrients. And if we can do that, we can turn any soil anywhere on the planet back into a more productive, more fertile soil, able to feed ourselves and, of course, the future of humanity. So it's a very powerful story. But again, it all starts, as we talked about in module 4, or actually module 3, how did nature create the biosystem we depend on? Module 4, how we create the sponges, the 3-dimensional matrices that then make that water available, make that biofertility enhanced, and as we'll see in next module, actually enable us to have preventative health, enable us to sustain healthy populations in complete contrast with what we've got now under industrial agriculture in the West. So that's another profound issue of preventative health. How does a society, a nation secure its future, not just by looking after its soil, but by looking after its own health through looking after its soil? Okay, well, look, basically we're a little bit over time. Are there any other questions, or do you want to put them on notice, or how do you want to proceed?
Thank you for answering all the questions, Walter. That's all the questions from our side.
Okay, well, look, if there are any other questions or any other follow-up, I mean, we will be having a follow-up at the module 10, bringing it all together. So please write them down, note them, and then let's take them on board, because they all integrate to be one compelling, beautiful, natural story. And just as we talked about acidity and solidity, sodicity and so forth, these are just elegant ways that nature solved these problems and created the very biodiverse, rich, productive biosystems we've evolved on. And it's really that we can do with natural farming as well to rebuild and secure our future. So thank you very much. And please, let's keep going forward. And yeah, great questions. And thank you very much and apologies for the interruption halfway through. Not sure what happens, but that's technology. Okay, all the very best. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Walter.
See you next week. Okay, bye.
Dharmendra?
Prachi. Yes, Prachi.
I have one question. Actually, hello.
Yes, Prachi.
I was on field and I could not get the proper answer for this. This one. See, we are doing natural farming, and one idea of natural farming is we will be not using chemical nutrients which we are placing into the soil.
Correct.
So, whatever part, what we either it is Drav Jivamrutam, Ghan Jivamrutam, whatever we are applying on the field, what I understand is they are acting as a biostimulants, which will make the nutrients easily available for the plants for their uptake. So that is that they are acting like a catalyst for that process. Yes. But then other question is if it is not the combination of pulses which is known to fix nitrogen into the soil, let's say if it is monocrop of some cereals or millets, which is not inbuilt, which doesn't have inbuilt capacity to fix the nitrogen and those parts, from where we will fill up that gap of chemical, this one?
Yeah, thank you, Prachi, I think similar question was the last question also, that we are not adding bulky organic manure also here. So both questions are like in similar direction. So in natural farming, it is not just biostimulants that we are using. We are adding indirectly tons of biomass. Okay, for example, Navdanya method, there is intense polycropping. There is constant leaf litter that is already always falling on the ground and it gets recycled. So without transporting, we are adding a lot of organic matter in the soil itself. Okay, so that is one thing. It's not just that pulses, but even other crops also, cereals or other crops also. We have other principle, no natural farming principles besides use of biostimulant, that is addition of organic matter, crop diversity, and no tillage or low tillage, like that. So what these methods are ensuring is that there is a lot of root biomass is intact in the soil. So a lot of organic matter is like already added. If you have grown a crop for a season, you have incorporated 30% of the biomass in the soil. So this all gets recycled. What you have to do is that instead of earlier, we all were into preparing compost elsewhere and transporting into the field, or tank sale transported onto the field from some far off place. All of that we have done. So what Walter has mentioned today is that how do you make sure to re-establish the natural processes that can add 10 tons of organic matter instead of actually transporting them. So all these principles that we have in APCNF, like nearly 4 or 5 of them, are addressing this nutrient cycling, crop diversity, addition of organic matter, and continuous crop cover throughout the year. So many soil should not be left fallow. So each season, every season, some or other crop is growing. So which is meaning a lot of biomass is getting into the soil. No,
Dharmendra,
so
does
all
this
of that.
means that there will be, let's say now, so one essential component, what I understand is that recycling of biomass getting into the field after the grain part is removed is compulsory if it is not going for fodder. है ना?
Not necessarily. For example, see, above ground and below ground biomass, if you take above ground, not all of them we can recycle. We will take that away from field also for fodder purposes or for some other purposes. Okay, for example, sugarcane, entire thing will be taken out from the field.
Right.
But root system will be intact. That 30% of the biomass, total biomass that is produced in that season. So
Yes.
that much is also sufficient. And also a lot of intercrops are there. There is a lot of leaf fall will be there. For many of the crops, entire above ground you will not be consuming and taking off the field, but certain crops you can recycle. So it need not be deliberate, but the main thing here is that addition of carbon, we have to understand addition of carbon into the soil has to happen. Liquid carbon pathway, you have to see. Liquid carbon is direct injection of photosynthetes, the root hairs into the depths of the soil. So that is 5 to 30 times or 20 times faster than other conventional methods of organic matter addition, like incorporation of green manure or and you apply mulch on the surface that gets into the soil. That is a slower process, whereas liquid carbon pathway is very fast in sequestering carbon in the soils. So 365 DGC, polycropping, these are all showing the benefits much faster. So if we are not doing these, we are keeping the land fallow, we are not using intense polycropping, then we have the burden to add organic matter. Okay, if you have crop cover, living root is ensured throughout the season, you don't need to depend on these bulky organic manure, whether it is crop residue or FOM, all of that.
One last question in this continuation would be, so
Yes.
this crop litter to disintegrate into the format of nutrients for the plant should uptake it, there will be some time lag. So this, like what you say suggest is that time lag either could be like matched up, because the season wise the crop is taken continuously on the field, but the biomass to get disintegrated and to get available in nutrient form to the plants will take some delayed time, right, which may not be within that season itself. So how to cope up for that season when we are actually getting into the natural farming? So once this cycle continues, I think that would happen regularly, but
Yeah.
when we are entering, then
Yeah, please.
Are you suggesting to add some external, like you're saying liquid carbon, like an external application in this way would be helpful in these cases?
No, liquid carbon I meant is the root exudates. Root exudates. Can you hear me, Prachi? Prachi, can you hear me? Am I audible?
I missed. There is some network issue on my part. Please pardon. Sorry.
See, liquid carbon I meant was root exudates that are pumped into the soil depths.
Okay.
That is liquid carbon. It is not any artificial method of applying. That is one thing. And because of a lot of pumping of carbon in the soil structure is enhanced, and the otherwise inaccessible surface areas of soil particles are now accessible because they are separated and that structure is made. So roots have a lot of mineral interface that is available for nutrients to take. So it is not necessarily whatever nutrients are there in the organic matter will be entering into the plant system. No. Soil minerals are there. Soil has all the nutrients, like 50 nutrients. So those will be now available because of addition of carbon. The structure is improved. Roots can penetrate deeper, and soil organisms can, like fungi, they increase the reach of the roots to several folds. Because of all of these, nutrients are otherwise that are limited or inaccessible are now available for plant. So it is not that only those nutrients that are in the organic matter are now, with the agency of microbial processes, they are now released and then get into plant system. No, that component is also there, but main thing is that soil is now making all of its mineral particles, root surfaces, soil mineral surfaces available for nutrient exchange. That is one thing. Okay.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, great.
Thank you, participants, for attending the Q&A session of Module 6. We got Module 7 just now. We'll be sending it to you shortly. After the Q&A session, we'll be joining the breakout session. The link for the breakout session is available in the main WhatsApp group. The topic for each group to be discussed during the session has already been circulated. Hoping to have a very productive breakout session discussion. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you all. Yes,
Dharmender, pre-work session 3 o'clock. Tomorrow you are not available.
Yes, sir. 3 o'clock it will be there. Just now we got the module. We were expecting to receive yesterday itself, but only 10 minutes ago I got that. I need to go through it very quickly before come prepared.
You try to do 80% perfection level. You can't do 100%. There is no time, but we may have it at 3 o'clock so that it goes up to 5:30.
Okay, sir.
So that tomorrow you are in traveling.
Okay, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.